Get, and now we're recording. Okay, so Jorge, first of all, if you're nervous at all or anxious about today's outcome, you can lower that filter, okay, because you have no problem in actually passing today. Okay, so
Okay, thank you. I
we'll do the
appreciate that.
formal congratulations later on, but now let's have a conversation. Okay, so we'll start off then with Dr. Hirabayashi.
Okay, so Jorge, congratulations on making it to this point. I think this is a lot of work and that really shows. And I think it was a really important curriculum, really relevant and really impactful to, the organizational context that you were describing. So kudos to you and to your chair for getting to this point. The questions I have for you today are really because there's always questions. Some are questions that sometimes the feedback gets moved back into the dissertation, and sometimes they're just thought questions, right? Because sometimes a good dissertation will kind of help us step back and kind of think about the ways in which like other environmental factors kind of impact, right, the dissertation or how we look at the problem of practice, et cetera. So I have a combination of those today, and I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that. And then as we listen and we kind of think about how you're replying and what the replies are, then we can kind of talk about whether things get moved back into the dissertation or not, whether that just kind of stays here as part of your defense.
Okay.
For my first question is really around units, like the how units 1 and unit 2 fit together.
Mm-hmm.
So as I was reading through this, I kind of had a thought that kind of kept coming up as I was, looking at your plans for units 1 and 2. And I think that it was very clear to me that your unit 1 was about more about positionality and bias, right? About self-reflection, about our own bias. And unit 2 was more about instructional strategies, right? About what we do to implement changes, particularly into our syllabus. And I wanted to ask, how do you see those two fitting together? How does unit 2 build on the unit 1 activities and outcomes? And how do you see those kind of fitting together?
Yes. No, that's a really great question and something that I kept thinking about too as I was writing the curriculum. And the way that we structured the 2 units, unit 1 is more of the declarative knowledge of positionality and implicit bias and what is culturally relevant pedagogy. The definition of it is in that unit as well, and that leads into unit 2, which is actually applying that declarative knowledge and actually implementing it into your lesson plans, into your units, whether it's in Canvas or the curriculum's in Canvas, but whatever the teachers are using, the instructors are using, that's where they actually use that knowledge to implement it into their lesson plans, into their modules, if that makes sense. And that's why unit 1, I take that back, unit 2A is like a review of all the declarative knowledge that was learned in unit 1, and then that leads into the actual application of those concepts into their lesson plans, which is what they do in unit 2B.
Okay, so the 2A thing I think is a little bit unclear to me as I was looking through that, right? I think that sometimes what happens is that there isn't always an explicit connection that I think has to be very explicit for people, how that positionality and bias then is affecting their practice, and how that means then their instructional practice is how we make choices in our instructional practice, right? I think that has to be sometimes a lot more explicit, both to the participants, but also then in your design. And I think you want to kind of specifically call that out a little bit more. It can't be just a review. It has to be an explicit, so here is how these biases affect our instructional practices, and this is why we're doing this here, right? So this is how A leads to kind of B, right? So I would say just approach perhaps that as less of a review and more how can you explicitly, right, convey to your learners that those biases, right, that affect our choices, And so what we're trying to do is change the choices, right? Because
Yes.
what we're trying to do is in understanding that. I think inherently that was implied. I think that I could see that sort of in, implied in the design. But then when I look at the slides, it's not always clear that that was going to come out right to learners. So just always think about,
Okay.
and I think this is something Dr. Diaz is probably going to talk about it too, is that there will be participants with different areas, different levels of prior knowledge and expertise, and being able to
Yes.
make that connection. And I think sometimes that it's nice to be able to just explicitly call that out for what it is, right? As we all have biases, and
Absolutely.
that influences things like, how we engage in discourse, what we choose to read, how we approach our students, our expectations of them, all of those things. I think that is really important to kind of frame for learners, because oftentimes I think some people, believe it or not, will lose kind of sight of that and not really be able to make that connection. So it's just nice to be able to do that. So then I would say my question is, so I'm thinking a little bit about like then timing. So how much time? So I'm looking at your timing. You had like basically like 60-minute blocks a little bit, I think is sort of what they were. I made a notation in several of the lesson plans that I thought like things seemed really rushed. Like sometimes modeling was only 5 minutes. And I was like, wow, modeling how to write a positionality statement or to, change lesson plans and integrate, like that's going to be a lot more time, because it's actually in the modeling where there's going to be a lot of questions, right? So there's a lot of questions, and, you explicitly say, which I think is great, that there's going to be a lot of real-time feedback, which is what we want, which is what we need. Right. But if your modeling is only 5 minutes, there isn't a lot of time for questions, for like actual modeling and questioning. And then sometimes it was like, I think 9 to 15 minutes to actually do activities where they were creating their own, either their own positionality statement or, revising their own lesson plan, which doesn't seem like a lot of time. And so I just wanted to ask, so tell me a little bit about your thought process around the timing, and how much time you're spending on activities, because it felt kind of rushed just a little bit. And I just want to talk to you about like parameters and how we might be able to help you with that.
No, yeah, we can definitely increase that, because we can definitely, there's a couple of options that we can do during Flex Week, where we can either choose to do like a 60-minute session, or an hour and a half, 90-minute, or even a 2-hour session. So to your point, we can I think it's a great idea to increase, maybe even double some of those aspects, some of those like you said, like the modeling. I would definitely agree that should be longer. I appreciate that. That's a really good suggestion, actually. So I will go ahead and make those changes. And the reason that I put it was a little bit rushed was because I really want the participants to really spend a good chunk of their time actually writing the curriculum, so specifically for like the unit 2B, and even yeah. So that's where that logic came from, was cut, not necessarily rush, but spend the time going over those concepts, and then using that time for me to go around and kind of look at what they're doing with their lesson plans, how they're putting in those concepts, like you just mentioned, positionality and implicit bias, and those culturally relevant pedagogical practices into their lessons. But I agree. I think that's a great suggestion. I'll go ahead and make those changes to my curriculum. I like that.
Right, because I'm just looking at it, and like, for instance, that you're going to have faculty write a positionality statement. I mean, you have 15 minutes for that. And I was like, I'm not sure that's going to be enough time for people to write a positionality statement. And
that
then
can definitely be increased. I agree.
Right. So I really think you should kind of take a look at that. It typically too, I always think leave more time, because unexpected things happen or unexpected questions happen. And, you have like a demonstration you have lecture and demo in unit 2B, where you have a lecture and demo of modeling the procedures for incorporating culturally relevant practices in daily lessons. You have 5 minutes for that. I'm like, I think that's actually the heart of what it is. So really, really think about like what you need here. And I would
Yeah.
say just be consistent on how you extend the time. Maybe these should be, 90-minute sessions or
Okay.
right, or something like that, because
Yes.
like
Yes.
part of it depends on how many people you have in this group. If you had 10 people, it might be
Yeah.
5 people might be different than having 50, right? But yeah, the timing
Absolutely.
is a bit off. And so I would just kind of think through that a little bit more
I like that.
about
Yeah.
how much time they need. So that would be my question there about that. The other
Okay.
thing is, I guess I had a question. So Dr. Yates, I didn't bring this up in the debrief because I just saw my note for here about your checklist, right? So you have a checklist in
Mhm.
2B. Tell me a
Correct.
little bit about where, like, why these, like, you put together a checklist, right? Tell me a little bit about, I mean, I think I know, and I think that like where the checklist items come from.
Yes.
Tell me
Yes.
about your choice to include these items, because culturally relevant pedagogy can include a lot of different things. And but tell me about your choice to particularly choose these, and like why you think it might be really important for your audience to cover these items.
Just to clarify the checklist
For unit
for unit
2B.
2B. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a couple of thought processes that went to put that checklist together, and I really wanted it to be a checklist that instructors can look at, and like that actually involve like practices they can put into their curriculum. So that's where the thought process came, and reviewing some of the Lats and Billings uh literature and some of the things that came up with Hammonds too. That's I kind of put a mix of all of those uh all of those concepts together in regards to culturally relevant pedagogy and culturally responsive strategies, and that's where that checklist came. I definitely wanted it to include at least a positionality statement in there too, um, and potential bias, because I really wanted to make it explicit that positionality and bias, that's definitely part of, almost like you mentioned, like almost like a rewiring, like relooking into what you're doing in your curriculum and how you can make that better, so there's not as much bias. And I think positionality was a huge concept for me. I'd never heard about it before this program, and I think it must have been like the first semester uh in this program that really made a big change for learning, right? It's like the actual changing of behavior, or so that really changed my behavior, and that's why I really strongly believe that should be part of the concepts that are in that checklist. Let me see, equitable strategies for student engagement. That's part of culturally relevant pedagogy. um Rubrics for validating student work, that's part of it as well, and then making sure they have inclusive language in there. I mean, that's part of what Lassen Bindlings indicates in Hammett as well. So um does that
It
answer?
does. And so one thing I will say is that I think the reason you're going to need a lot more time is if you're actually going to go over all of these things and explain
Hmm.
them, this is going to take quite a bit of time.
Hmm.
Right. So for
Okay.
instance, and like
Yes.
I would come back and just probably take a little bit of a closer look at the checklist, because like your number 3 is my lesson plan is free of bias. Like, okay, what does that mean? How do you assess that?
Hmm.
Right? Like,
Hmm.
what do you mean it's free of bias? I don't understand what you mean by that, right? I mean, I think we could talk about all the different ways it could be free of bias, but there's always a bias. There are choices that are made, right? So
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
particular biases that you're looking at, which I think is sort of reflected in other things. So I think you need to kind of just rethink that one in particular.
Okay.
But like
Yeah.
inclusive language, what does inclusive language mean, right? So I think there's a little bit here when we use this checklist that, like, if you really want to think about transfer, like you really want to make sure that you spend some time going over it, but then also maybe
Hmm.
even thinking about hyperlinks to sources, like inclusive language, like maybe to the APA inclusive language, right, handbook
Yeah.
that they produce or something of that nature. Because when they're doing this on their own and, updating their syllabus, then one of the things that we're going to look at is, well, like, I don't remember what do we mean
Hmm.
by
Hmm.
inclusive language, and how does or there's a handout somewhere on the web that talks about inclusive language, particularly in syllabi, right? That could be really helpful.
Yes.
And I think that's, so I think just make sure that you have some like maybe links to help them to go,
That's a
well,
great idea.
why do I have to have a rubric, right? I can't remember why, or how do I put together a good rubric, right? So like,
Yes,
this
yes,
is
I
why
have
like
those.
timing wise, going through each of these is going to take you like more than 5 minutes. Like this is going to be a lot of time. And this is, and then having them make those choices and integrate them. They may not be able to do it there. They may be able to, you know, do it after they leave, but like being able to see worked examples and seeing the changes that maybe others have made as examples about, you know, how do we make something more inclusive language, and working on
Yes.
small pieces and activities together. So I think that this is just something you want to think, this checklist is going to be very important to you, and it is the heart of like,
Yes.
it is what is Unit 2B. And so I think you want to just kind of come back to that a little bit more. And then the last point I'm going to make is just something to think about, is that a number of your outcomes are around like they're going to incorporate this into like their teaching, but the reality is that the unit stops at them making changes to their syllabus, right? You're not actually following them into their classroom to see if they're implementing these. Hopefully they are. Hopefully we can look at the syllabus, but even if someone makes a change in the syllabus, doesn't actually mean that their instructional practices are culturally relevant, right? That they could be actually still doing harms in the classroom. We don't know. Right, their syllabus could look very nice, but it doesn't mean their practices when they actually teach on a week-to-week level are. So that's just something to think about, because I think sometimes you state that this means they're doing culturally relevant instruction. I'm like, not really. It means their syllabus may look a little bit more culturally relevant, but I don't know that their actual practices are. So I'm going to stop here because I have another question that's sort of just a thought question that's not going to affect your dissertation. And I know Dr. Diaz has some questions that might affect your dissertation and the actual written piece. So I'm going to kind of let her ask her questions now, and then if we have time, we'll come back. All right.
Okay.
Thanks for that, Jorge.
Thank you. Thanks.
So once again, Jorge, congratulations to you and to Dr. Yates for getting you to this point. I actually just have a couple of questions with respect to, and it could be that you had them there and I just kind of missed it, about self-assessment. You have some really good information about how they will help assess their students, and specifically on Unit 2B, where you talk about considering how the students learn best. Did you think about building in something, because I think it ties back to that really good point you made about in the minimum quals handbook for teaching?
Yes.
It's a master's, or as I just suggested that you update, because it could also be a bachelor's and an associate's for certain career technical education programs. So
correct.
You're getting such a variety of individuals in a classroom during Flex Week. It could be full-time or part-time faculty. It could be a faculty from career technical services. It could be faculty for a transfer level, for non-credit. Did you think of how to have themselves kind of assess where they are in their knowledge of culturally relevant pedagogy, because they're teaching such a wide array of classes, and also because their own minimum quals for being there are very different, and that we don't, as a community college system, have credentialing or subject matter experts for that? Did you think of them initially, because you're going to have people from such a variety, kind of assess where they are in their knowledge of this coming into it?
No, that's a really good point, and that's definitely something that can be added to the digital reflective journal.
Okay.
So instead of like, well, in addition to them doing a reflective entry at the end of each unit, that's I think that's a great idea to put in the beginning, to do a reflective entry about what they currently know about what is culturally relevant pedagogy and what their definition is, and that way they can see that learning at the end of the unit or units. So I think that's definitely an entry that we can put in there. I think that's
just to
a
have
great
them go
suggestion.
to understand their own metacognitive process of thinking about, oh, well, what am I thinking about this? Is this something I agree with? Is this something that I don't want to do? Is it that I teach a career technical education class and I don't need to do this? So it's uncovering that bias. And it kind of ties in together, but it leads back to that whole, you did a really good job of setting up the premise of the reason and the problem statement. This is a mismatch between faculty, the culture of most faculty and the culture of most of the students enrolled. So this is really important, because that in the long run builds into the vision we have for community colleges of, we hit a decrease in enrollment with COVID. So we're trying to increase enrollments again. Everybody's talking about enrollment management at every campus
Yes.
right now, even at the state level. And, by having
Correct.
students feel safe on a campus, by having students feel that they belong, that sense of belonging you talked about, but how do we get faculty buy-in to say, yes, I need to do this?
Yes, yes. And I think that's something that I'll put into actually both units for them to reflect what they learned at the very beginning, even before we start. So I'll make that add additional time to that, to your point, Dr. H, to maybe put that maybe spend a couple of minutes of them doing a journal entry of what they currently know about culturally relevant pedagogy. So yes, I will probably submit this as a session, as a 90 or a 2-hour 120-minute session, instead of it being so compact.
And I think especially because it really supports what, Dr. Hirabayashi said about the amount of time in the modeling. A lot of this information will be new to a lot of individuals. I'll say at least 90% of those that are in the class, it's going to be new to them. So it's going to take a little bit of time for them to be able to process that, and then, transfer that skill then to say, how do I take this and embed it into my classroom setting?
Yes, that's great. Yeah, that sounds I'll definitely put that into the curriculum. I like that. I like that a lot.
That was all I had.
There's on that, just building on what Dr. Diaz is saying and following on Dr. Hirabashi's, there's a kind of a general principle that we've, or at least I've adopted. When your time is limited, whether it be your 60 minutes, but you started out with 60 minutes, or now 90 minutes or 2 hours, think of your instructional design tables on its side, so to speak, the 11 events of the instructional design and your learning activities, right? So think of it on the horizontal, and then it should resemble a bell curve, where most of the time that you're taking, the greatest concentration of time is in the assessing the prerequisite knowledge, so they know what you're talking about, modeling it, demonstrating, modeling, and then providing practice and feedback. That's at the height of the bell curve. That's all the big time. The introductions, gaining attention, and the transfer at the end, and big ideas, they can be much, much less time. Okay, sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense.
And sometimes that's the only way you can do it, if you're limited to like 60 minutes because of limitations. But it's great that you're going to be able to get more time for this, because then you can even spend even more time modeling with all the question and answers that Kim was talking about. Okay. And by the way, just trying it out on somebody, good critical friend, so to speak, trying and walking through your lessons is something we do in the master's program, where they have to do peer reviews. So walking through it, you realize that you have, I have 5 minutes for stating the learning objectives, and you actually do it in a walkthrough, peer review walkthrough, and you realize that you've only spent really 1 minute is all you need, because what you're doing is you're having people read the learning objective, et cetera, and you're not repeating it. You're not talking over your slide, because that's cognitive overload. So you're just letting them read it, and they can read it much faster, and you can read it anyway. And you've asked for questions, clarifications, understanding, and then you move on. That whole thing takes less than a minute. See what I'm saying?
Yep. Yes.
So
I understand. Yeah.
And fortunate or unfortunate, your first time out in the implementation, you will realize either how much time you've over allocated for certain events versus the time that you need to increase for certain learning events.
No, I like that bell curve idea too. The most amount of time should be spent on modeling and feedback, and that's
exactly
a good chunk of it in the middle. I like that.
Okay. Any other questions about the content and everything? I know, so I think Dr. Hirabashi has another question, more thought question.
There were thought questions, I think, Jorge, not necessarily like changes to the dissertation. So, you know, in education right now, in higher ed in particular, we're having a lot of discussion around AI, right? And
Yes.
I want to kind of just get your thoughts. Have you thought about, and what's your thinking around the use of AI potentially to help with this skill, right? So if we're trying to help faculty implement culturally relevant pedagogical practices into, you know, their lesson planning and designing, what are your thoughts on the ways that AI might be assistive, right, in that outcome?
Oh no, I mean, yes. I mean, I've been playing around with ChatGPT. I even subscribed to the 4.0, and that's definitely something that can be a tool for instructors to do a prompt, you know, write this concept or this lesson plan that includes culturally relevant pedagogy or culturally relevant pedagogical practices. That's definitely a really neat tool, even with the free version of ChatGPT, and I know that Google's working on theirs as well. And so is Microsoft. But that definitely would be a humongous tool. I think it's changing the face of education, to be honest, with these tools that are coming out, and I think it's going to make it more. I know that there's controversies around it, but I think that it's definitely going to make education more equitable in a lot of ways, even as a tool not only as a tool for students, which is what everyone's talking about, but to your point, how tools for educators to revamp, change their curriculum. I think that's definitely, maybe that's like the next reiteration of this curriculum is you know that could be a part of a lesson too, maybe part 3, how to use AI tools, technology tools to revamp, to make additions to your lesson plans to make it more culturally relevant for sure. And that's definitely a conversation that we can continue to have as well. So I think that's great. That's a really good idea.
I think that's just something to think about. Like, there are some things that AI is much stronger at being able to do than other, like just from a lot of the testing that we've done when it comes to things like curriculum and course planning. It is actually quite good at making rubrics. If you give parameters for an assignment, it is quite good at saying, here are the criteria, here's how many points it's worth, here's what the goal is, here's the kind of class or it's not as if the rubrics completely good. It's not. But there are good ideas, so I think, that come out of that rubric. And goodness knows we've seen a lot of like either no rubrics or really bad rubrics out there. That sometimes
I've
using AI might actually be better. So I just want to kind of say that there are some things in here, you know, or using inclusive language. I mean, I think, you know, I think that AI would also be good for that. If I put in a passage and say, translate it and put more inclusive language into this passage, I think that is also something that AI would actually be able to do. Not that you should accept it like wholeheartedly without reviewing it and saying, does that actually align with the principles of what we know like inclusive language are? But does it also make sure everything gets caught? Probably, right? So like, I think you want to just think about it as you're thinking in the future, if you do implement this, about the ways in which I think AI is going to be a huge part of our conversation in education as we go forward. And I think that that's really helpful for us to kind of think through and just kind of think about the possibilities when it comes to, it's not as good with like the references a little bit. So like if I were to ask it, do I have, authors of diverse genders, races, etc., like in a citation list, like that's not going to help. Like it's just not very good at that. Like that's going to have to be something that like an instructor, but does that free up the instructor to put in the time to do that if the inclusive language is already sort of like, scanned and rubrics are somewhat like half, created that are fairly decent? Yes, it does. It helps us understand like where we put our time, because AI cannot help us, right? It's not very reliable in this particular area. So I think that's just something to think about. It was a thought idea, because it's a conversation we're having. And I used it
Yes,
the
yes,
other
it is.
day to recreate a syllabus, and I was just I put in, I was like, did I use everything? No, but were there nuggets in there? And I was like, okay, well, that just saved me like a couple minutes, because like I could take that and modify it. It gives me something to start with. And I will
Exactly. It's a
just
really
say
good starting point.
it
Mhm.
did, and it did cut down my time in sort of designing a rubric and an assignment aid that I thought was really, really helpful. So
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think that in targeted cases, as long as you have the knowledge to be able to assess whether that's good design or not,
Yeah.
I think
Mhm.
that it is helpful to have a place to start. But it also helps like some novices who just like aren't aware of how to start, right?
Mhm,
So what we
mhm,
know
mhm.
about that first step out, that's why worked examples are so helpful, right? Too, is that that first step out can also be helpful as long as you're teaching them the knowledge about how to evaluate, right?
Mhm, mhm.
What's a good rubric or not. So that's just something to think about,
Oh, yeah,
right?
that's yeah, that's a really great point. And yes, that's definitely something that probably like the next reiteration of this curriculum and it can definitely be included, should definitely be included.
And
All right.
that's Jorge, that's something you did in the very beginning. Don't forget when you asked regular Google how to, and you got a list of steps from regular Google's using your
Yes,
AI, and then you
yes,
repeated it, the same how to, in your Google Scholar, in which you then compared, validated, confirmed, and compared the peer review with what you got in overall Google. And then those journals then led you to into the library to look at some other additional journals, citations as well. So that process, what you were doing is using AI in regular Google and then confirming it and with peer review, and then actually going to the libraries to confirm your citations.
yes.
So
No,
that's
you're
you've used that
you're right.
process before. So the
Hmm.
idea is to keep using it when you have something new to explore, but you have to be critical of, because
Yes, yes, but the caveat of that,
ChatGPT will give you false citations. They will make them up.
yeah, hallucinations they
Right.
call them. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Right.
So
So you have to like,
very
yeah,
skeptical about some of the
see,
stuff.
you have to choose when there are citations that come up, you actually have to like look through them and then read through them.
well,
Is it a good place for you to do reading? Like say, oh, like give me a reading list so that you as a faculty member might have missed something. Yes, but there it's also not good at finding literature in general. It's not a library search system, right?
Hmm.
Looking at
Hmm.
academic journals. So that's
mhm.
just something, that's a caveat there in terms of like limitations, right, of AI. Um,
Yeah.
so I
Yes.
just have one final question if we have time. It's just, Jorge, just it's the end of your EDD journey, so to speak. And my question for you just is what have you learned about yourself as a result of going through this program?
No, I've learned a lot about myself. I learned to believe in myself. I'm in a currently in a new position as director, and I really felt like this program gave me the tools to be a really not only like an effective and efficient director. I work now. I'm a regional director for the Orange County Regional Consortium, but to always have the equity uh in my mind, like in the back of my mind, like how are these strategies, all these objectives that we have that we need to meet as a consortium, how can we make sure that we meet those and we meet those in an equitable manner to increase student achievement, to help all students, not just a certain population. But I really like my job, and I really think that I really like it. It's because actually I feel like I know what I'm doing. I've been talking to people. I'm like, this program really, it changed me. It changed my behavior, my thoughts, and how I go about thinking of things, and thinking about the bigger picture. I really feel like it's opened my eyes and my mind in a lot of ways. And um to your point, even moving forward with this curriculum, I want to maybe potentially still have a conversation about how to implement AI, or how to use AI, for this curriculum. And then I've been asked to be chair for the professional development management association, at the chair for the PD part of it. Now that I'm management, and maybe this is a conversation that I can continue to have with Dr. Diaz, because hiring kind of falls into the purview of management, and maybe using the same framework lads and billings and cultural development pedagogy. How can management apply those concepts in their role? So yeah, those are two applications, or two strands that can be that I can go with the curriculum that I developed for this dissertation. So I mean, it's opened a lot of doors for me. It's made it's made me and my family more financially secure as well. So it's just I owe that to this program, and to you, and to Dr. Yates and Dr. Diaz for as the committee, kind of moving me forward with this program, with this dissertation. It's yeah, it's changed my life, and I'll do it all over again. I'm telling everyone about this program, trying to recruit more people. We need more people like uh, like the committee out there in education, for sure.
Great.
Thanks, Jorge. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks.
Jorge, do you have any other comments or questions for us at all about your work? and your
No, I know
dissertation?
that I'm gonna meet with you, Dr. Yates, probably within the next week, in the next couple of days. And it sounds like the main changes that are gonna come to the actual kind of structure of the units. So I'm gonna be spending some time with that, and then I really appreciate the committee making those suggestions. I think those are really gonna make my dissertation and my curriculum a lot stronger than it already is. So yeah, thanks. Who would think my grandpa lived a couple of miles from USC for 30 something years. He passed away during COVID, and now I'm graduating from from USC with a doctorate today. So getting hooded. So that'll always provided me a little bit of motivation when I had my doubts. So, and now I'm here. So thank you.
All right. Dr. Hirabashi, Dr. Diaz, any other?
No,
Comments?
just congratulations, Jorge, and soak it
Thank
all
you.
in.
Thank you. We'll do. We'll
deserve
do.
it.
Thank you, Dr. Diaz. Thank you.
And I will see you there at 3:00 today.
Oh, great. Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We'll all be there, obviously. So, okay. Alrighty.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
So I think we can
for everything.
probably with the recording, Dr. Hirabashi, we don't need to go back into a room where we can congratulate Jorge for a job well done, right?
Yes.
All right. You have successfully defended your dissertation. All right. Congratulations. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Way
Really
to go.
appreciate it.
Sparkles. Oh, look at Dr. Hirabashi sparkling.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love it. Thank you.
And I'll provide this recording to you as soon as it's available to me on Zoom. And
Okay.
then you and I will meet. And once you've reviewed it and got all the notes from it. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right.
Sounds good.
And
Thank you.
I have a few just inserted comments that I have, so I'll just send that to both of you separately. Okay.
Great.
Okay.
All righty.
Sounds
All
good.
right.
Sounds
All
good.
right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Bye.
Congratulations, Jorge. Thank you.
See you later today.
Okay,
Thanks.
see you all.
See you later today. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.